It's the morning after the night before. Vote Leave has had a surprise victory. The markets are in turmoil and there's a run on the pound. The Prime Minister sent a senior civil servant, played by me, to Brussels to begin scoping negotiations with the EU, with clear red lines set by the referendum on immigration, budget contribution and sovereignty.
Jonathan, as you can imagine, we're very disappointed at the result of the referendum, but of course we do respect the decision of the British people. But of course you need to bear in mind that it's up to you to put forward your suggestions. It's up to us to decide how they can be accepted.
The first option is to remain in the single market, like Norway, as a member of the European Economic Area and get its benefits, but be outside the European Union.
Jonathan, you are proposing the Norway model, which means belonging to the European Economic Area. But you know very well that being in the single market brings along certain responsibilities, such as, for instance, the indivisibility of the four freedoms. The free flow of capital, services and goods includes also the free flow of people. You cannot just pick three and leave one out.
If you're putting those sort of conditions on our membership of the EU single market, we simply can't stay in the single market. It would be a rejection of the very things the British people have voted for. We can't do that.
I'm even saying more than that. I'm saying that, for instance, the new rules and the development of the single market will be decided by us in Brussels, and we will send you the rules to be implemented. You know how they call this in Oslo? Government by fax.
We are not Norway, we're a serious country. We must be allowed to have our own special relationship like this. Why would you not allow us to have a different relationship than Norway?
For God's sake, Norway is a serious country. You cannot say that. But in fact, the reality is that we can set up a special arrangement for a former member, as you are. But let's be very frank. We are concerned to prevent other currently member states to feel tempted to use the British path. So I will not anticipate there is too much willingness to change the rules of the European Economic Area.
The Norwegian option was never going to work for us. If we had to obey the rules, we'd be worse off than before, and they're never going to let us have a free ride. I'm going to try something else. The second option is to leave the EU and rejoin EFTA, like Switzerland, which has over 120 separate ad hoc agreements with the European Union. Well, if we can't be inside the single market, we'd like to be outside the single market, but with free access. We can be in EFTA, like Switzerland. They have 120 agreements.
Switzerland?
Yes.
Oh, for God's sake. Okay.
What's wrong with being like Switzerland? They have an excellent relationship with you. They have separate agreements. They don't have to accept your judgments. Why can't we have exactly what they have? They even had a referendum on immigration to stop immigration from the EU into Switzerland.
But Jonathan, that is the problem. I mean, the Swiss model is totally broken. The EU refused to accept the decision of Switzerland in the referendum on immigration, and we have put into question the entire whole of the agreements with Switzerland. We are putting pressure on them to make an overall revision of the position of the relationship between the EU and Switzerland. So how can you expect us to offer you something that we are putting into question with Switzerland? No, that's a no way.
But we're a much bigger country than Switzerland. Why can't we have the relationship that Switzerland has that allows us to have the advantages of the single market, but without having to have immigration? Why can't we have our services have free access to the EU?
For a very simple reason. As you know, the agreements with Switzerland do not cover services. And they don't, of course, include the financial services, which are an economic area that is very important for the UK. Now, you are not serious speaking about the Swiss model.
You would really exclude our services from the EU in these circumstances?
Yes, that's the system of the agreement with Switzerland.
Well, in which case we're not going to go for that option. Even if the Swiss option was on offer, I couldn't go back and tell the Prime Minister that services were excluded from access to the EU. That's 80% of our economy. I've got to try something else. The third option is to have a free trade agreement with the EU, like Canada, where we control our borders again and try to get as much access as we can for our goods and services.
Yes, we can negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK, as we have done with Canada. It will be also in our interest, I believe. Nevertheless, I must say that these agreements take time to negotiate. We have negotiated for several years with the Canadians, and it has not yet been concluded in the sense of being ratified and starting to be implemented. So I'm not optimistic.
But we're not Canada again. We are your biggest trading partner. Germany, the biggest country in the EU, has a trade deficit with us. They're not going to want to stop selling their Mercedes to us. You're not going to want to stop selling your Portuguese wine to us. It's in your interest to have open trade with us.
Yes, you are a major trading partner, a big worldwide economy, but you sell 44% of your goods to us, and we only sell to you 8% of our goods. And you mentioned the trade deficit. Let's be clear, you have a trade deficit with only two countries, Germany and the Netherlands. They are definitely important countries in the EU economy, but you need to bear in mind that there are other member states. The Germans might be interested in selling you their Mercedes, but probably the Poles are much more attached to the idea of free movement of people. And Jonathan, in this conversation we always need to bear in mind, even if only one rejects the agreement, it will not come into force.
The three negotiated options aren't going to work. But as a negotiator, I always have a BATNA, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. I'm going to try that now. The final option is not to seek any special relationship with the European Union, but just to revert to the World Trade Organization rules.
You could consider that possibility, but probably you should think about it carefully. The question is not in world trade the weight of tariffs. The question is the non-tariff barriers, procurement rules, administrative rules, consumer protection rules, standards. Now, do we want to go back to that world?
But if you're proposing to impose sanctions on us of that sort, we're going to take measures against you, reciprocal measures under WTO rules.
It sounds to me awkward to listen to a British official speaking about sanctions and protectionism. But let me tell you very frankly, you need also to think your position in the World Trade Organization, because for the time being you are integrated in the European Union as a group of countries. When you are standing alone, you will have to redefine not only your position in the World Trade Organization, but also in relation to all other your trading partners. Remember what President Barack Obama has said here in London a few weeks before the referendum. If you leave the European Union, you go back to the end of the queue.
The only other options for Britain would be a customs union like Turkey, or an accession agreement like Albania. But neither are an offer, and we wouldn't want them if they were. I've been negotiating for 40 years, but in my opinion, this is one of the most difficult negotiating hands I've ever seen. There's a choice on one side between sovereignty, and on the other side, access to the single market. I'm going to have to go back and tell the Prime Minister he's got to choose.